cat, it's Maximus here, this time continuing the Roundhead Ratchet series, and I hope everybody is healthy and safe these days. This is a New Britain NH45. This is from the 70s with a 1960s era socket, something I found at one of the few rare finds at an estate sale, and it was a big old ratchet with a big old socket. I've shown this in, I believe, a couple other videos, but I've recently done some videos where I take apart and compare mechanisms of roundhead ratchets, and have found that there's a wide variety of level of strength to the ratchet mechanisms, and quality ones will use two parallel pawls and be extra strong. We've seen that in the Cal, the Protos, even the Bonnies, and it turns out that the SKs really aren't that great, and like the Duros, the Wizards, the Powercrafts are a little better. They're single pawl, but they're finer teeth. And so I haven't done that with the New Britain, and I happen to have a 3/4 inch drive ratchet. New Britain was pretty big through the 30s and through the 70s, and then they sold out, and then their name kind of continued for a short while after that, and then they were lost to the annals of time. I really like this 3/4 inch ratchet. It's an 18-inch unit, very heavy duty. It's one of the more recent ones. Nice aggressive knurling on the handle, but surprisingly no hole. And with a heavy 3/4 inch drive ratchet, you'd think you'd be able to hang it. It has a reasonable mechanism. I don't know if it's a 44 tooth or a 60 tooth, but I do like that dual ball retention. If we can get that to focus, holds on the socket so much better, but it's still reasonable to put on and off. Something like snap-ons, it always seems that they just cram a super hard spring in there, or if you just had two balls, then you could double the amount of friction while retaining the same level of spring tension. And you kind of get the best of both worlds. But I always like this ratchet because it just doesn't have a particularly large swing when you're using it. And 3/4 inch ratchets are always nice, because if you just want to break bolts really with ratchets, that's what the 3/4 inch drives are for. You can really put a lot of force on them. This has just a huge thick beam, really flares out around the neck. So this is a heavy duty ratchet. A little bit of play in the anvil, but it's not too bad. So that is just kind of the general review of one of these old New Britain 3/4 inch drive ratchets. The bigger tools are harder to find, and New Britain did make a pretty nice one. It has a real nice compact head. It just happens to be real tall, about an inch tall. Actually, let's see if we can't get this this spring or this spiral snap ring out of here and get this mechanism apart. So most of these, you'll find these spiral springs in all sorts of tools, from ratchets to holding on guards on skill saws, and they usually have a little notch that you can get a flathead screwdriver under and kind of pry the edge out and then work its way around. Sometimes they just have a little bevel like on this New Britain, and those are difficult to take out. You have to actually kind of wedge in there with a pick like so, and then try to get the screwdriver just right under the edge, and it just sometimes is just a fidgety process. And when you're doing this, you definitely want to have the pick facing away from you, because it can be real easy. And there we go, we finally got that popped open there. And just run the, sometimes you have to pull on it just so it doesn't damage the lip that it's in as it goes around. And that is quite the spring, and it's quite dirty. And here we'll get our first look at the mechanism. And indeed, it is not a twin pawl design, but I will give them credit. Even though it's one pawl, we have a floating top cap here. It just has a notch. This is cast steel. I can see there we have an E-clip that retains all the parts in there. So all this cap is doing is just flipping this back and forth here like so. With a surprising amount of tension, this thing is not going to automatically reverse. Automatic reversing happens when ratchets, when this thing gets caught and when you're backing up a roundhead ratchet, and can cause the pawl to automatically reverse. So very stiff, and we can see that there's quite a few teeth on there. How many do we have? 4. It's a 9-tooth mechanism. That's pretty robust. All right, got this cleaned up. So there is an additional detent, which is pretty strong, which is what's controlling, or what is resisting against the reversing mechanism, and then the pawl itself has a second spring. So it's a pretty nice design. It can easily be rebuilt. My experience, when you get into some tension designs like this is it can be a little bit of a bear to reassemble, because you end up with like little ball bearings where you have to like have it halfway closed and then jam in the ball bearing and get it all lined and get the little tab of the spring. So this one's in pretty nice shape. It's not rusty or anything. It's not jammed. So in my experience, you kind of jump into those things just, really when you need to. And this ratchet's really in fine condition, so I'm just going to give it some fresh, lighter oil instead of quite the heavy grease, so it doesn't want to pick up grit so easily. And to take a quick look at the ratchet head, not too bad. Pretty darn nice machining inside there. I really like how it's symmetrical. It's been ground. We can see that one edge here isn't like drastically thicker than the other edge. If we look at it from the side profile, we can see that it's pretty symmetrical in the rounding of the head. So a really nice job on finishing it. It's always nice to run into these old tools, especially when they're in good condition, and happen to be ones that, since these are essentially hand ground, handmade in many of their operations, it's nice to see ones where care was taken when they're, finished. And the mechanism I'm satisfied with, even though it doesn't have two pawls. I mean, this entire circumference is well supported on the other side. And the physical size of this pawl, this is a 1 inch by ½ inch ratchet pawl. So that's a large amount of engagement. And I'm sure you can easily stand on something like this. And there you have it. I have it all back together. And with that new lube, it really runs pretty nicely. So goes to show that, once again, round head ratchets aren't always what they seem. And in this case, it's a single pawl, but they just went with one pawl that has the equivalent size of two and has a nice, solid, well-balanced design. And something else in these round head ratchets, a lot of comments on pair head ratchets about back drag. And on round heads, it really seems you just don't ever have that same type of issue, just due to the nature that just such a larger diameter that the teeth are cut into, as well as ones like this where it's two totally separate detent mechanisms. The mechanism that is holding the switch in place, which is actually really solid in a ratchet like this, is a separate spring than the one that actually is running the pawl. So a ratchet like this has a really nice low back drag, yet the reverse lever is very solid, and you're not likely to accidentally rotate this when you're having your hand on top of it, manipulating it, or when you're just ratcheting. So once again, nice little adventure into all these different designs of round head ratchets, and each one I've opened up has had their own kind of peculiar take on how to make the design, and it's kind of neat to go on that exploration. Anyway, I hope everyone stays healthy and safe, and I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.